So anyway, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Allahumma anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa 'allimna ma yanfa'una wa zidna 'ilman ila 'ilmina. So we've been taking a hadith in Abwab al-Tahara from Kitab al-Tirmidhi, Sunan al-Tirmidhi, al-Jami'. And this is going in order because we don't want to skip anything, inshallah ta'ala. Babu ma ja'a fi nahi an al-bawl qa'iman. As Imam al-Tirmidhi, rahimahullah ta'ala, he has this chapter. This is chapter 8, chapter of what has come of the prohibition of urinating while standing. And this is before we get into the hadith itself and whether or not there really is a prohibition, because as we know, like as we talked from last time, the subject of urinating or answering the call of nature, whether it's urinating or defecating while facing or turning one's back to the qibla. So Imam al-Tirmidhi, he had a bab or a chapter about that, bringing a hadith with the prohibition of that. And then the next chapter is Babu ma ja'a fi rukhsati min dhalik, what has come of the concessions of that. So trying to get everything one at a time, but bring the whole chapter, the whole subject matter together, inshallah ta'ala. So here he says, Haddathana Ali ibn Hujrin, akhbarana Sharik, عن المقدام بن شريح عن أبيه عن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت من حدثكم أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يبول قائما فلا تصدقوه ما كان يبول إلا قاعدا. So here Aisha رضي الله عنها, and this is a Hasan hadith, she says that whoever tells you that the Prophet, the Messenger of God, would urinate while standing, then do not believe him. He would not urinate except while squatting, while sitting. And in other versions of this narration, she said that he never urinated while standing ever since the Quran was revealed. Mundu nuzul al-Quran. And some narrations said the Prophet ﷺ told Umar never to stand while urinating, but that command to Umar is weak due to a narrator or rawi who is matruk, who is abandoned. But the more authentic versions simply say that Umar said that he never stood for urinating ever since he accepted Islam. And Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, he said that it is from al-jafa to urinate while standing, coarseness or roughness, harshness, and the manners of the Badu, if you could say, if you want to say, man bada jafa, as has come in the hadith. And Imam al-Tirmidhi says, Hadith Aisha ahsanu shay'in fi hadha al-bab wa asah. This hadith of Aisha is the most authentic and best hadith in this subject. But then the next chapter that Imam al-Tirmidhi brings is Bab al-Rukhsa fi dhalik, the concession or permission of that. And here he says, Haddathana Hannad, Haddathana Waqi' an al-A'mash, an Abi Wa'il, an Hudhayfa. أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أتى سباطة قوم فبال عليها قائما فأتيته بوضوء فذهبت لأتأخر عنه فدعاني حتى كنت عند عقبيه فتوضأ ومسح على خفيه. So Hudhayfa says, Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I'm going to actually add into the English version of this hadith. I just read to you the Arabic as it is in at-Tirmidhi. However, there are other versions from other hadith collectors, other muhaddithun, namely at-Tabarani, and also the Sahihain, the 6 books, that because this is a very, very authentic hadith. But Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam called Hudhayfa, saying, "Cover me, usturni," and he came to a community compost. Subatata qawmin. So he urinated on it while standing, and I brought him some water for wudu. The Prophet Hadeeth says, فَأَتَيْتُهُ بِوَضُوءٍ. Wudu and wudu, two different things. Wudu is what you make wudu with, and so wudu with the fatha on the waw, different from wudu. Wudu is the water that you make wudu with. So I brought him some water, then I left to be away from him, but he motioned for me to come closer, and this is in Sahihain, motioning for him. لِيَتَأَخَّرَ عَنْهُ, until I was behind him. So he performed ablution and he wiped over his khufs while performing ablution. And Waqi' rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, هذا أصح حديث روي عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في المسح. This is the most authentic narration concerning wiping over foot coverings from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Imam at-Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, قد رخص قوم من أهل العلم في البول قائما, that some of the people of knowledge have allowed that and permitted that, standing while urinating. Now the next chapter, because it's somewhat related, while we're on the topic, باب ما جاء في كراهية البول في المغتسل, the subject of what has come of dislike to urinate in a bathing place. And this is a question that might come to just about everyone, so we will discuss that, because there are some adat that, especially in the United States of America, where this is considered a very, very repugnant thing. So what does Islam actually have to say about that? Urfiyan, and under the Sharia. So here, حدثنا علي بن حجر وأحمد بن محمد بن موسى مردوي قال أخبرنا عبد الله بن مبارك, the great Abdullah ibn Mubarak, عن معمر عن أشعث بن عبد الله عن الحسن عن عبد الله بن مغفل الصحابي رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم نهى أن يبول الرجل في مستحمه وقال إن عامة الوسواس منه. So Abdullah ibn Mughaffal, he said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited that a man should urinate in the same place that he bathes in, his bathing area. And he said, alayhi salatu wasalam, most of the whispering, the wasawis, is from that. And this is recorded by the Ashab Sunan, the four, which means who are Ashab Sunan? They are at-Tirmidhi, Abu Dawud, An-Nasa'i, and Ibn Majah. And they're also, as Tirmidhi says, قالوا في الباب عن رجل من أصحاب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So in this, there's also a hadith from a man from the companions of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. And because all of the Sahaba are considered udul, they are trustworthy. As long as we know that someone is a Sahabi, then what they bring to us from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then that is, inshallah ta'ala, authentic, at least from their standpoint. Now, in addition to that, there's I'm going to read some of the other ta'liq that Imam at-Tirmidhi gives here. He said, وَقَدْ كَرِهَ قَوْمٌ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْعِلْمِ الْبَوْلَ فِي الْمُغْتَسَلِ. So some of the people of knowledge, they disliked urinating in the place where you bathe yourself. وَقَالُوا عَمَّةُ الْوَسْوَاسِ مِنْهُ. And they said, repeating what is echoing what is in this hadith, that most of waswas is from that. وَرَخَصَ فِيهِ بَعْض. But other ulama, they gave concession. وَرَخَصَ فِي بَعْضُ أَهْلِ الْعِلْمِ مِنْهُمْ ابن سيرين وَقِيلَ لَهُ إِنَّهُ يُقَالُ إِنَّ عَامَّةَ الْوَسْوَاسِ مِنْهُ فَقَالَ رَبُّنَا اللَّهُ لَا شَرِيكَ لَهُ. So Ibn Sirin, Muhammad ibn Sirin, a great tabi'i, one of the oldest of the tabi'i and the first of their generation, he said that there's nothing wrong with that, and someone mentioned this saying that most of the waswas comes from that. So he repeated, or he said, Rabbuna Allah, our Lord is Allah, la sharika lah, and he has no partner. So that, it seems to suggest that when you are, as he's here, I think he's mentioning or indicating, wallahu alam, that any time that you go to any place and believe that you are going to answer the call of nature, you begin, of course, by making dua. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-khubthi wal khaba'ith, as we took earlier a few weeks ago. And of course, also there are the ad'iyah when you finish, seeking Allah's forgiveness for entering that time of ghafla, and also because of our own imperfections and flaws when we take the good halal tayyib food that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides us and turn it into complete and utter najasa. And subhanallah, so then it seems like Imam Ibn Sirin rahimahullah ta'ala, who is also the great dream interpreter, well known, it seems like he is saying to put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in any case. وقال ابن المبارك, and this is Abdullah al-Mubarak, he said, قد وسع في البول في المغتسل إذا جرى فيه الماء. So here we get to what we experience here and nowadays in the 20th century especially. As Ibn Mubarak, he says, is that there's a lot of wusa, which means, extensiveness. I don't know how the best way to translate that, but a lot of ease in the ruling so that it's not a narrow ruling, so to speak, when it comes to urinating in a place of bathing, إِذَا جَرَى فِيهِ الْمَاء, meaning if there's running water. If there is running water. So it's as if there is no problem with that whatsoever.
That'd be true, like a river as well.
Yeah, that goes to a different mas'ala. The Nahan or the Prophet sallallahu, there is a prohibition of urinating making wudu from water that is stagnant that you previously urinated. Nahan Nabi sallallahu. I have to recall the lafz. There's al-ma' al-rakid, something about making wudu in al-ma' al-rakid. I don't know if it's after or regarding urinating in it, but inshallah that's a hadith that hopefully we'll come to inshallah ta'ala. But stagnant water, so that's something that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade, but I need to be careful with that because I need to recall the exact wording of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, when it comes to running water, that's one thing that we're going to discuss inshallah ta'ala in a lot of detail when we get to the hadith about the water of the sea inshallah ta'ala. That's coming up in about 3 weeks inshallah, or about 3 durus. And the difference between a lot of water and a small amount of water, and which water is actually changed or affected by najasa that is tossed into it or potentially affecting it. So going into other narrations on this topic before extracting the rulings, there's a hadith from Al-Bazzar in his Musnad, although it's classified by some as غير محفوظ, which is a type of weakness, and it comes from Abdullah ibn Burayda an Abihi رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال ثلاثا من الجفاء. There are 3 things of harshness or coarseness. أن يبول الرجل قائما, which is to urinate standing, أو يمسح جبهته قبل أن يفرغ من صلاته, and to wipe one's forehead before finishing the salat, أو ينفخ في سجوده, or to blow while in their sujood. So understanding that or translating that properly, the Prophet ﷺ, if this is authentic, there are three things that he alayhi salatu wasalam is describing as not the best behavior. One of which is the subject of our dars here tonight, urinating while standing, and the second, of course, and this is not the only hadith about this topic, about not wiping your forehead during the prayer, especially. And as for example, if you are praying, and especially if you're praying outside, there are pebbles or there's grass or something like that, and you are praying, and for example, you get something on your forehead. Here, the Prophet ﷺ suggests that from this hadith, we can understand that you should not wipe that off until Assalamu alaikum, Assalamu alaikum. And likewise, when you are in sujood, not to blow too hard. But of course, regular breathing, as you do when you make dua, that's what everyone does and is unavoidable. So here, and then also Ibn Majah documents that from Jabir radiallahu anhu that the Prophet ﷺ prohibited urinating while standing. However, that contains an abandoned transmitter. And going on to some of the other narrations, and Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he mentioned that Umar ibn al-Khattab, Ali ibn Abi Talib, and Zayd ibn Thabit, three of the greatest Sahaba, have all been witnessed urinating while standing. And going to the other subject of a hadith related to urinating in a place of bathing, this is an interesting hadith collected by Abu Dawud and Nasa'i, and it's a Sahih hadith. عن حميد بن عبد الرحمن قال لقيت رجلا صاحب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كما صاحبه أبو هريرة رضي الله عنه 4 سنين. So he says that I met a man that had accompanied the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم, just as Abu Hurairah accompanied him for 4 years. قال نهى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أن يمتشط أحدنا كل يوم. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that he forbade that anyone among us should comb their hair every day. أو يبول في مغتسله, or urinate in the place where they take a bath. أو يغتسل الرجل بفضل المرأة والمرأة بفضل الرجل وليغترفا جميعا. And this is, if we picture how they would take a bath those days, it would be, a big tub of water that they would use and, like scoop over themselves and, clean themselves that way. So here the Prophet ﷺ, the last line of this hadith is that he also forbade that, for example, if a woman used that tub of water to bathe herself, or a man used that tub of water to bathe himself, it would be prohibited for the other gender to use that water afterwards. But yet he's saying that the husband and wife should take from it at the same time, not in when neither can see. And there are other ahadith about that, and there's other interesting narrations about that. It's a discussion of fiqh, and it's also an opinion that is only followed by the Hanabila, because there are other ahadith that suggest that there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But understanding these narrations now that we've taken all the different ahadith about the subject, what do we actually gather? Imam at-Tirmidhi and others, they summarize the ruling by saying that any prohibition to urinate while standing is one of etiquette, ta'addub, and not a prohibition of forbiddance. That was Imam an-Nawawi. And it's a good and important habit for us to be accustomed to, as the Prophet ﷺ was accustomed to it. And this is the habit that was observed in his home, where he could have been more flexible, because doing otherwise appears to be showy and inconsiderate. And as some ulama have said, that it's loud, meaning urinating while standing, and makes cleaning of oneself istinja more difficult, and cleaning the toilet, and cleaning the bathroom in general, because of ricochet from that. And subhanAllah, how much more so is that in our times? And squatting, of course, as ulama say, is most importantly more private, which is a maqsad, an important goal that we should seek in ourselves, and modest. So by practicing modesty, it increases our modesty. And so this is one of the ways that we do that. Al-haya min al-iman. And, لِكُلِّ دِينٍ خُلُقٍ وَخُلُقِ الْإِسْلَامِ الْحَيَاء. Every religion has its great manner or moral characteristic, and that which summarizes Islam, the great characteristic of Islam, is modesty. So any practice that we can do, especially a practice from the Sharia, from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to increase our modesty and decrease our jafa, our coarseness, then we should definitely take that. Because there are sometimes when we see different manners and different behaviors, different values that we want to emphasize or cultivate within ourselves, sometimes we don't really know how to properly cultivate those values. We have some idea, so we end up doing something, but it ends up turning out to be something that's actually against Islam and goes against another value in the same time. So here we have a prophetic method of cultivating modesty within ourselves. Now, going on to how sometimes this is enforced in the Muslim world, or especially in the West. Sometimes, I don't think I've seen in these stalls, but in some masajid, you go into the men's room, you enter the stall, and right on the inside of the door is a big stop sign that says it's against the sunnah to urinate while standing. Has anyone seen that? Okay. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, Rafal. So that's I remember where I came from in Peoria, I saw that a lot, and I've seen that at a few other different masajid here and there, that on the inside of the stall will be a big red stop sign. It is against the sunnah to urinate while standing. And it's like shouting at you. And now, first of all, one thing, that's something that if someone is doing that, urinating while standing, they're not going to see that because they're not facing that at all.
Against the wall.
That's just... Exactly. I mean, that's like, you're preaching to the choir, the person who's sitting down and squatting. And, the second thing is, what are guests of the masjid going to think when they see that? I remember there was a group of non-Muslims that came to the masjid in Peoria, Islamic Foundation, and he used the restroom, and he came out like kind of like, and he's like, and he talked to the imam there. It's like, well, I kind of did this and that and the other. And he's like, okay, don't worry about that. But anyway, so just to have that frightening sign there. And here we've seen many narrations that show that there's some leeway in this, and that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, took some leeway in that. And that's actually one thing that's kind of interesting, is that there are other narrations that mention that this was a habit of the Arab before Islam, and it seemed to be a habit that the Prophet ﷺ, or a practice, that something that the Prophet ﷺ sometimes did outside more often than inside. However, there's one narration that also says that he stood up because of a wound that he had on the inside of his knee. However, other ulama counter and say that's not the reason why, because that would not have prevented him from doing that in the home of Aisha. But he maintained the sitting, squatting position. And one time, one hadith from Abdurrahman ibn Hasana describes the Prophet ﷺ. He said that the Prophet ﷺ went to urinate sitting down, kama tabulul mar'ah. That's his exact words. He sat down just as a woman does. So this is a Sahabi witnessing this and making his own observation and comparison and showing that, the Prophet Prophet's own modesty and teaching a lesson to the Sahaba. So this is something that the Prophet ﷺ observed not only in the privacy of his home, but also outside of his home as well. And subhanAllah, this is alhamdulillah. I mean, there's lots of hikmah to this, as we mentioned. Now, for the other issue that we covered here, urinating in the place of bathing, fil muqtasil or fil mustaham, then Shawkani, radiallahu anhu, or rahimahullah, said that since the Prophet ﷺ reasoned it with staying away from whisperings, that means that the prohibition is one of dislike and not of forbiddance. If this narration is authentic, then most scholars thought that whispering was related to whether or not one was pure from najasa, the najasa that would bounce back or ricochet, and nothing else. But most scholars from the successors from the tabi'een and those afterwards allowed urinating in any bath place if water was going over it and there was a place for the water to go, a drain meaning, so that the urine will not stagnate in one spot and create a stench. And this is one thing that, in American culture is a very positive aspect, because it's strongly, strongly detestable and repugnant in U.S. culture to do that, to urinate in the shower or anything like that. And depending, it could be even punishable, like, for example, having a gym membership revoked or something like that, or getting a class detention if depending on where or when or how, country club or one of those, group shower things. But a lot of it, almost on, that's something that Muslims should generally stay away from if they can avoid it. But however, that's one positive aspect about American culture. The final issue that's mentioned in these ahadith, that's not mentioned in other ahadith that we'll talk about later, is combing your hair every day. And what's interesting is when looking at this narration, where the Prophet says, "Naha an yamtashita ar-rajulu kulla yawm," the Prophet prohibited a man from combing his hair every day. One of the translators from this hadith in An-Nasa'i, he said that it's likely to prevent the Muslims from making their appearance a major concern. So we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Jamil yuhibbul jamal. He is beauty and He loves beauty, but does not love that you obsess over beauty or become vain over it and showy and like a perfectionist. Because that's one thing that if you get into the habit of doing something every day, and here the prohibition is not against combing, it's against combing every day. So some days you do that, but other days you embrace your natural beauty and, appreciate that and bathe in that and bask in that and appreciate what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created of you, and recognize that you don't need that to be beautiful creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because when you do that every single day, you comb yourself or style yourself every single day in the best manner possible. And this is something that could lead to, on one hand, looking down on others, belittling others that don't do that, and following fashion trends that could be unhealthy. As we know, there are plenty of those that sometimes people just they obsess over beauty and image, and sometimes even leading to surgery and altering or mutilating their bodies in different ways. And then new trends come, and so they reverse that or they do something else, and then overall just it promotes a culture where that beauty is supreme, and it leads to a kind of arrogance and also hypocrisy and sometimes despair and depression. Allahu musta'an. While we are reminded here to attend to the beauty of our hearts more and break the pathways to arrogance. And subhanAllah, it's the Prophet, Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, وَإِذَا رَأَيْتُهُمْ تُعْجِبُكَ أَجْسَامُهُم. And if you saw them, the hypocrites, then their bodies please you. تعجبك أجسامهم, their bodies please you. كأنهم خشب مسندة, it's as if they are blocks propped up, like they're just carved out of wood, the way that their appearance is so phony. It's not natural. Like mannequins, really. So this is when we embrace being, or embrace the whatever nature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave for us, then this is a different kind of freedom that we should follow and be happy with. Alhamdulillah. And so this is only to a reasonable extent, of course, and it's only for combing. Remember, the Prophet ﷺ, when it comes to, for example, letting yourself go for 1 day a week, for example, remember that the Prophet ﷺ also, he used the toothstick, the miswak, constantly, and he hated detestable odors. He was always fragranted and had the best of smells. So when on that day of the week that you decide to let yourself go a little bit, make sure that, within reason, not to offend other people, offend their senses, just to the point of, reminding yourself that, you don't look so bad naturally after all, but as far as offending other people, then save that for home, your spouse. Allahu musta'an. غفر الله لنا سبحانك اللهم بحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. بارك الله فيكم. Any question?
So the part about wiping the feet, will we get to that?
Oh yeah, there's lots of separate ahadith. That's a whole different quagmire. Wiping over the coverings. There's a couple ahadith that explain the rulings of that in more detail. In general, like one of those ahadith is where the Prophet ﷺ, and I think this was also with Hadeeth, if I remember correctly, where Hadeeth asked him about it, and he said, "Inni adkhaltuhuma tahiratain," which means that I put the foot coverings on while I was in a state of tahara, meaning that he had wudu when he put it on and then wiped over it. So wiping over the foot covering is only if you had wudu originally when you put it on in the first place. And then there's also so that's one of the important ahadith about wiping over the foot coverings, and also one of the other important ahadith that further gives the ahkam of it is that المسح is يوم وليلة للمقيم وثلاث أيام بلياليهن للمسافر. If I remember it correctly, that wiping over the coverings is for a day and a night, basically 24 hours for someone who is, resident, but it is up to 3 days and 3 nights, 72 hours for someone who is traveling. And, alhamdulillah, though, in our situation nowadays, traveling for the most part has been made much easier. But if you are on a camping trip, then this is one of those ahadith which is very, very, very important to know. There are many different narrations that, especially we talk about in Tahara, that it's important to, should really make a compilation of ahadith and ahkam for the Muslim when they go camping or hiking, for example, doing a several day or even, some week-long trips or very long trips, months at a time. And because some of the travel that we do, subhanAllah, it really puts to use other bits of knowledge that we would never take advantage of and never actually apply. We just simply study. But one of the biggest question or the biggest controversy when it comes to issues of wiping over any foot coverings is, what is the material of the foot covering? Leather, as was common during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, or cloth, which is of course porous and absorbent, and if you wipe over that, if it's and also the way that you wipe as well. And just to summarize that, there's different opinions among the madahib, but Allah knows best. What seems to me is the most authentic way is to simply wipe over just like this, with hands that are damp. Remember, you're not taking a hose and hosing down your feet. No, remember the Prophet ﷺ made wudu with with just a cup of water, just a small cup of water, 6-ounce, 4-ounce cup, a mud of water. And so with your hands damp, after you've finished, wiping over the scalp, then your hands damp just like that, real quick. And then you're done. But when it comes to socks, jawarib, as it's called in Arabic, the Sahaba, they allowed that, or excuse me, most of the Sahaba, most I should say, that there are many athar, there are many narrations from several companions that they did that they wiped over cloth socks, even cloth socks that had holes in them. So that there are some ulama, most of the madahib, they do not allow that. However, the Hanbali madhab, of course, I always mention the Hanbali madhab because generally speaking, they have the most rukhas, the most concessions. They are the most flexible when it comes to issues of worship, prayer, purification, anything, you name it. The Hanbali madhab, alhamdulillah, they the most flexible with a lot of these issues because Imam Ahmed, of course, collected 1,000,000 ahadith. He memorized 1,000,000 ahadith, and so he had the most understanding of the practices of the Sahaba. He came later and traveled more than any other scholar of hadith before or after him, rahimahullah ta'ala. And so he had that khibra, that experience with the practices of the Sahaba, and so in his madhab that's allowed. And in our environment, especially here in America, I don't see why any Muslim wouldn't take advantage of that opinion. And especially when it's narrated from some of the Sahaba like Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma and others, wiping over socks even if it's got a couple holes in it here and there. You wear out a sock, that's how it starts, but it's no reason necessarily to throw it away yet. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Inshallah, that will be more depth later, inshallah.